Picture the most beautiful city in the world. Now fill it with 2 million people who haven't eaten a proper meal in 6 weeks. Add a ring of Prussian artillery sitting on every hill for 30 miles in every direction. Add a winter cold enough to crack stone. Add the smell of horses being butchered in the street and the sound of rats, thousands of them moving through the walls at night. That's Paris. October 1870. The same Paris with the grands boulevards and the café terraces and the women in silk walking along the Seine. The same Paris that invented the restaurant, that has more kinds of cheese than some countries have citizens, that considers a badly cooked omelette a moral failing. That Paris is being slowly, methodically starved to death, and tonight you're going to live it. Not the history book version, not the version where Victor Hugo writes noble poetry about the suffering of the people, not the version where you read a menu from a fancy restaurant and marvel at what rich people were forced to eat. The version where you're standing in a queue at 5 a.m. on a November street that smells of frozen horse blood, and you're trying to decide whether the thing in the butcher's window is something you're willing to put in your mouth. Honestly, I make these history stories, and half of you are probably here because you saw something about people eating elephant trunk and thought, how bad does it have to get before you eat elephant trunk? The answer is, not as bad as you think, and that's what's going to stay with you. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, just a fraction of a moment you've forgotten, then the cold reminds you. It's the kind of cold that has weight, that presses down on the thin wool blanket like a second body, insisting. The kind of cold that makes your lungs feel like they've been lined with tin when you breathe in. Then the smell. It's not just one smell. It never is in Paris. But these days the smell has changed. Underneath everything, underneath the usual coal smoke and river mud and a million people packed into narrow streets, there's something new. Something that wasn't there in September. It smells like emptiness, like cellars with nothing in them, like market stalls that have been picked clean, like the specific absence of bread baking, which you only notice now that it's gone. For the first 2 weeks of the siege, you still smelled fresh bread every morning from the boulangerie on the corner. Monsieur Tessier kept his ovens going with flour he'd stored since August. Good white flour that turned into the kind of bread you could tear apart and press against your teeth and feel your whole body relax. That smell stopped about 3 weeks ago. Now Monsieur Tessier bakes with something else. You don't know exactly what's in it. Rice powder, people say, straw, ground bone, things that are technically food in the same way that a stone is technically a seat. The bread it produces is grey. It sits in your stomach like regret. And underneath even that, underneath the absence of good bread, underneath the coal smoke, underneath the river, there is the smell of you. 6 weeks into the siege, with water increasingly difficult to heat and soap rationed at the Mairie alongside everything else, you are not exactly fresh. Welcome to Paris, November 14th, 1870. The Prussians have been out there, in their neat camps on the hills of Versailles and Châtillon and Clamart, since September 19th. 56 days now. 56 days of the most sophisticated city in the civilized world being slowly squeezed. Your name is Marie-Claire Bertrand. You're 19 years old. You came to Paris from Rouen in the spring of last year with a letter of introduction from your mother's cousin and enough money for 2 weeks if you were careful, and you found a position by the end of the first week as a bon à tout faire for the Moreau family at 14 Rue de la Chette in the 5th arrondissement, a narrow street 2 blocks from the Seine. Maid of all work. That is what the phrase means. All work, every work. Cook, cleaner, laundry maid, errand girl, occasional ironer, perennial answer to every problem that cannot be solved by Monsieur or Madame Moreau themselves without lowering their dignity. You do not mind this mostly. The Moreaus are not cruel people. Monsieur Moreau teaches law at the Sorbonne, which is close enough that you can hear the bells of Saint-Séverin from the kitchen window. He's 52, angular, with reading glasses perpetually perched at the end of a nose that was clearly designed for carrying reading glasses, and he spends most of his time in his study surrounded by books arranged in systems that look chaotic, but which he insists have an internal logic known only to him. Madame Moreau is the one who runs the household. Thin, capable, always slightly worried about money even when there is money. She is the kind of woman who has a specific place for every object, and notices immediately if that object is not in its specific place. In normal times, she gives you a list on Monday morning for the week's marketing, and you go to the market at Les Halles, or to the smaller shops on the Rue Mouffetard, the fishmonger, the cheesemonger, the butcher who has the best pork, and you buy what is needed and you cook it, and the Moreaus eat it, and you eat whatever is left, which is usually enough. That was normal times. Normal times ended on September 1st, 1870, when the news came through that the Emperor Napoleon III had surrendered to the Prussians at Sedan, and then ended more immediately on September 19th, when the Prussian army completed its encirclement of Paris, and the city gates closed, and the roads out became lines of artillery, and the world shrunk down to whatever happened to be inside the walls. 2 million people. Whatever food they had, whatever food could be grown on the parks and gardens and verges that people had immediately torn up and planted with vegetables, working with the desperation of people who have just understood what it means to be an island. You understood it before most of them. You grew up in Normandy. You know what it looks like when the stores run low. You started rationing your cooking in the first week, before Madame Moreau asked you to. You started stretching the stocks, adding more water to the stocks, finding ways to make a meal from parts of things that Madame Moreau, in her previous life, would have turned her nose up at. She turned her nose up at them anyway for the first 3 weeks. Now she eats them. Now everyone eats everything. The wooden floor of your room, a closet really, off the kitchen, with a window the size of a book that looks onto the back courtyard, is so cold against your bare feet that you pull them back under the blanket involuntarily before forcing yourself upright. You're wearing your dress, your underdress, your stockings, and your shawl to sleep. There is nothing else to do. The kitchen fire goes out sometime in the night, and the coal allowance from the Mairie is not enough to keep it burning through the hours when no one is cooking. Coal. There is another shortage that crept up on you. Paris before the siege consumed 7,000 tons of coal a day. 7,000 tons. The mines are in the north, which is now, of course, on the other side of an army. So the city has been burning through its reserves since September, and the reserves are running out. People are burning furniture. The parks are being stripped of wood. Last week, you saw a man sawing the wooden railings off a balcony on the Rue Saint-Jacques, and the family who owned the apartment watched him from above with expressions that suggested they had already done the same to their own furniture and couldn't judge. You splash water on your face from the basin. The water has a thin crust of ice across the top that you break with your knuckle. The cold is a shock that travels from your fingers straight to your teeth. You got this water yesterday from the pump at the end of the street. The pipes still work mostly, though there have been days when they don't, and then you join the queue at the pump, standing in the grey November light with your buckets, listening to your neighbours talk. Your neighbours talk about the same things now that they have talked about since September. When will the Prussians attack? They haven't attacked. They're waiting. Starving out a city takes longer than attacking it, but it is more certain. When will the government negotiate? The government fled to Tours on a balloon before the encirclement was complete, which is either cowardly or sensible depending on who you ask. When will the army break through the Prussian lines? The army has tried twice. It didn't go well. When will the food run out? Nobody says this one out loud, but everyone is calculating it in their heads every time they look at what's left in the pantry. In the Moreau kitchen, you know exactly what is left in the pantry. That is the job. You know, because you are the one who put it there and the one who takes it out. The kitchen is at the back of the apartment, ground floor, looking onto the courtyard where there is a small garden that Monsieur Moreau planted with turnips in October. The turnips are coming up now, small, pale, defiant little things, and Monsieur Moreau goes out every morning to check on them with an expression you have never seen on his face before, a kind of desperate tenderness that he usually reserves for very old books. You light the fire with the last of yesterday's newspaper and a piece of wood that was, until last month, a decorative box that Madame Moreau kept in the salon for visiting cards. There are no visiting cards anymore. There are no visits. Everyone has retreated inside. The fire catches. The kitchen warms by perhaps 2 degrees. You count silently, as you always do now. The pantry. Half a sack of flour, 20 kilograms at best. That flour, the bad grey flour they have been selling at the Mairie since October, is what you will make bread from. A loaf today, enough for 3 days if you are careful. A tin of sardines from before the siege, which you are saving. Dried lentils, about 4 kilograms. A small amount of rice. 6 eggs, which Madame Moreau obtained somehow last week, and which she is treating with the reverence usually reserved for jewellery. Dried beans, some salt cod that smells stronger than it should. What you don't have: butter. Real butter, the good yellow Normandy butter that used to arrive at the cremerie on the corner twice a week, vanished in early October. What they sell at the cremerie now is something whitish and watery that is called butter in the same way that the grey bread is called bread, technically, legally, by definition, but which your body recognises as an insult. What you don't have: meat. And that is the problem that is sitting in the back of your mind this morning, the way it sits in the back of your mind every morning now. The problem that is going to require a decision today. The Moreaus haven't had meat in 8 days. You need to understand what that means in a French household in 1870. This is not a modern situation where you might decide you'll just eat more vegetables for a while. In a Parisian household in 1870, meat is not optional. It is not a preference. It is the structure around which the entire idea of a meal is built. The French cuisine you've been cooking since you arrived at the Moreaus, the proper cuisine, with its stocks and sauces, its braises and roasts, is built on animal protein. Everything is. The stock that forms the base of every sauce requires bones. The sauces require butter and cream, also mostly gone. The roasts, obviously, require something to roast. Monsieur Moreau, who is a reasonable man about most things, has started looking at you with an expression that contains, very carefully suppressed, a question. He has not asked it directly. He is too polite to ask it directly, but the expression is there anything today? And today, you think there might be something. Because yesterday, when you were standing in the queue at the distribution point at the Mary, 45 minutes, freezing for a ration of bread and a small parcel of rice, you heard from the woman behind you, a stout butcher's wife from the Rue Xavier Privas, that the horse butcher on the Rue des Écoles had received a new delivery. Horse. Not a word that would have appeared in your vocabulary as a food item before September. Now you're going to walk to the Rue des Écoles and stand in a queue for as long as it takes, and if there is horse available, and if it costs something, you can manage with the housekeeping money that Madame Moreau counts out to you each week. With increasing grimness, you're going to buy it and cook it and serve it to the Moreau family as dinner. And this, in the 7th week of the siege, counts as a good day. The city is not quiet at 7 in the morning in November. Paris is never quiet. But the sounds have changed. The specific sounds that made Paris Paris, the market cries, the restaurant smells, the particular social noise of a city that considers eating a public performance, those are muted now, replaced by other things. There are military drums somewhere to the north where the Garde Nationale units are doing their morning exercises. Edouard Moreau, the professor's son, 24, narrow-shouldered and idealistic, signed up for the Garde Nationale in September, when there was still excitement about it, when people still thought the siege would last a few weeks at most. He comes home on his days off looking thinner and colder and less idealistic, and he eats whatever you put in front of him without the complaints that used to be a form of conversation. There are queues. The queues are the sound of the siege, really, the shuffling of feet, the low murmur of people waiting, the occasional sharp word when someone tries to skip ahead. Every morning, every shop with anything to sell has a queue snaking back from its door before the shutters are up. You have become an expert in reading queues, whether they're moving, what they mean, whether it's worth joining. The queue at the horse butcher on the Rue des Écoles is 40 or 50 people long. You take your place at the end. The woman in front of you is wearing a fur coat that has seen better days. The fur is patchy, and the collar is held together with a pin that used to have a stone in it, you can tell. She is perhaps 60, white-haired, the kind of woman who was probably a very grand person before September, and is now just another person in a queue. She glances at you with the particular expression of a Parisian who has decided that maintaining class distinctions while waiting in the cold for horse meat is not worth the energy. "First time?" she asks. Your accent gives you away. You've lived in Paris for a year and a half, but Normandy is still in your vowels. "No," you say. "Third?" "They'll have the haunches first," she says, as if sharing professional intelligence. "The good cuts go fast. If you want something for a stew, you wait. The tougher pieces are there longer." She pauses. "The shank makes an excellent daub if you have the wine. You don't have the wine. Nobody has the wine. Well, not nobody. The rich still have cellars, but the wine shops have been empty since October. With stock, you say, and the turnips." She considers this. "Turnips? Yes, a good aromatic. Thyme? A little. I've been drying it." The queue shuffles forward. She introduces herself as Madame Viardot. She used to live, she says, on the Rue de Rivoli. Very nice apartment. Her husband had been a silk merchant, and then he died in 1865, and since then she's been managing on what he left, which had seemed like plenty until the war started and now seems like nothing at all. My cook left in August, she says. When the trouble started, went back to her family in the Limousin. I've been managing myself since. You think of asking if she manages all right, but the answer is already in the worn coat and the careful way she's holding her purse. The queue moves forward again. The cold is the kind that presses into your face, into the back of your hands where your gloves have worn through at the knuckles. Your feet, in their too thin shoes, have gone from painful to numb, which is something. The cobblestones are slick with frost that hasn't melted yet. The sky above the rooftops is the flat grey of pewter, pressing down. From somewhere to the south, Montrouge maybe, or Châtillon, there is a dull boom. Everyone in the queue pauses instinctively, looks south. Prussian guns, says the man behind you. He's working class, a mason by the look of his hands, wearing a red bonnet that marks him as enthusiastically Republican. Morning bombardment. They're not trying to breach the walls, just reminding us they're there. As if anyone had forgotten. The queue begins to move again. Inside the horse butcher's shop, the smell is iron and cold and something underneath it. A grassy animal smell that is distinct from beef, that your brain keeps trying to categorize correctly and keeps failing. Horse. This is what horse smells like when it is raw and hanging. The butcher is a broad man with a red-veined face who is working with an efficiency that suggests he has been working this hard since dawn and has another 12 hours of the same ahead of him. His apron is magnificently soaked. The prices are on a board on the wall. You look at them the way you look at all prices now, with the specific mathematics of someone managing a household on a fixed budget that the prices are conspiring against. Horse haunch, 3 francs 50 per kilo. Horse shoulder, 2 francs 80. Horse flank, 1 franc 90. Offal, 1 franc 20. The offal. You could do something with the offal. You have been doing things with offal that you would not have imagined yourself doing 8 months ago in your previous life. The life where butter existed, and where a good rôti de bœuf on Sunday was something that happened because you wanted it to happen and not because you were one of the lucky ones. But the shoulder at 2 francs 80. You have 4 francs and 20 centimes from the housekeeping, and you need to save some for bread tomorrow. 1 kilo of shoulder, you say when you reach the front, and whatever offal you have. The butcher gives you a look that is entirely professional, neither pitying nor approving. He wraps the shoulder in paper. He adds the offal, heart, you think, and something else. You hand over 3 francs. He gives you 60 centimes change and wraps the package in a piece of old newsprint. The newsprint has a headline from October 12th. Gambetta departs by balloon. Government of National Defence continues from Tours. Gambetta. The Interior Minister who escaped Paris in a balloon to run the war from the provinces. You think about that sometimes. The image of a man stepping into a wicker basket attached to a gas balloon, rising above the Prussian camps, waving goodbye to 2 million people he was leaving behind. You tuck the meat inside your coat against your body to keep it from freezing on the walk home. The streets of the 5th arrondissement on a November morning in the 7th week of the siege. This is what it looks like. The horses are gone from the streets. Not all of them, not yet, but most of them. The ones you see are the ones the Garde Nationale still uses, and they are thin, and they look at you with the specific distrust of an animal that has begun to understand that the city has changed its mind about them. The dogs. You notice this now in a way you didn't in September. The dogs are disappearing. Paris had tens of thousands of dogs before the siege. The chiens de quartier, the street dogs, the shop dogs, the dogs that sat outside cafes with their chins on their paws. They're going. You see maybe a third of what you saw in September. Where are they going? You try not to think about this too specifically. You have the horse shoulder under your coat. That is the immediate problem. That is what you are solving today. The street vendors are still out because they have nowhere else to be. Turnips! Fresh turnips! 3 centimes each. The turnips are not fresh. They have been in root storage since August, but they are food, which at this point is enough recommendation. Chicory! Hot chicory! Real coffee has been gone since October. What they sell at the cafes now is roasted chicory and sometimes roasted grain, and it is hot and brown and costs a sou. And it tastes like someone who was told about coffee once and tried to reconstruct it from memory. A poster on the wall, put up by the municipal government, announces the updated ration schedule for the week. You read it the way you read all official announcements now, quickly, completely, noting what has changed. The daily bread ration, 300 grams per adult, down from 350. The official statement calls this a temporary adjustment. Everything is a temporary adjustment. The rats. You see one now, slipping along the gutter near the drain on the corner, its grey flanks sleek, its movements utterly unhurried. Before September, rats in the streets of Paris were a nuisance, something to be chased, something the municipal inspectors were supposed to deal with. Now they are something else. You have heard, not seen, not yet, that there is a market near the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville where you can buy rats, where professional rat hunters bring in their catches and sell them from baskets. You've not gone to this market. You tell yourself you're not going to go to this market. But you hold the thought at the back of your mind the way you hold all possible options, because the siege has taught you to hold all possible options. Because the siege has taught you that the thing you were certain you would never do becomes the thing you are considering 3 weeks later, and the thing you are doing 3 weeks after that. Your feet carry you home. The meat is warm against your chest. The turnips in Madame Moreau's courtyard garden are coming up pale and brave in the grey morning. Madame Moreau is in the kitchen when you get back. This is new. Before the siege, Madame Moreau did not come into the kitchen before 10 in the morning. The kitchen was yours in the mornings, your domain, the one room in the apartment where you were the authority on how things worked. Now she comes in at 8, because she cannot stop doing the calculation. She needs to see what there is. She needs to count it herself. She doesn't quite trust that you are counting it correctly. Not because she thinks you're stealing, she doesn't think you're stealing, but because accurate counting makes her feel less helpless. If she knows what is there, she can manage it. She's a woman who has spent her life managing, and management requires information. You understand this. You do not resent it. Much. Horse shoulder, you say, unwrapping it on the counter. And heart. Madame Moreau looks at the meat for a moment. How much per kilo? 2 francs 80 for the shoulder, 1 franc 20 for the offal. A small calculation crosses her face. Horse, she says finally, as if testing the word. It's good meat, you say, because this is true. You've made horse twice before, a ragout the first time and a kind of grillet the second, and while it is distinct from beef, slightly sweeter, with a texture that is different, finer grained, it is nourishing, and it does not taste of desperation the way some of the things you have cooked recently taste of desperation. Monsieur would prefer not to know, Madame Moreau says, This is not a question. I can call it birth, you say. Yes. She turns back to the window. This has become a small code between you. The things that are what they are but are called something else. The chicory is café. The grey bread is pain. The horse is bouffe. Language is a mercy, parcelled out where needed. You put the horse shoulder on the counter and assess it. 1 kilo. For 4 people, yourself, the Moreaus, and Edouard when he comes home on leave, which might be tonight or might not be until next week. You do not waste on uncertainty. You will make a daube, the slow-cooked Provençal braise, the thing that turns a tough, doubtful piece of meat into something silky and yielding. You need hours for this. You need heat. You look at the coal in the basket. Enough for the stove. Enough, if you bank it carefully and don't let it run high. You begin. This is the thing nobody talks about in the history of the siege when they talk about what people ate. They talk about the exotic things, the elephant, the bear, the zoo animals that are coming that you don't know about yet in November. They talk about the rats, because the rats are a good story. They don't talk about the daily work of cooking under siege, the way it takes everything you know and tests it until the test becomes the skill and the skill becomes survival. You take the shoulder and cut it into pieces. The meat resists the knife, it has been cold, and horse is a different density than beef. But it gives, eventually. You trim nothing. Every piece of fat goes in. Fat is calories. Fat is heat. You find 2 onions at the back of the pantry. They are soft, heading toward bad, but not bad yet. You peel them, saving the papery skins for stock. Stock. You're always making stock. You make stock from everything. Vegetable trimmings, onion skins, the bones from whatever meat you have managed to acquire. You simmer them for hours with the little thyme and bay you have left, dried and stored carefully. The stock is the foundation of everything else. Without stock, cooking is just boiling things in water. The stock pot is always going somewhere on the stove. It is the heartbeat of the kitchen. You brown the horse pieces in a little of the fat you saved from the last cooking. The meat sizzles and spits. The smell rises and it is good. The caramelized, complex smell of browning meat, that is the same regardless of what animal it came from. That is the smell of something becoming dinner rather than just being raw. You add the onions, you add stock, you add water. You add the turnips from the garden, 3 small ones that Monsieur Moreau will not mind losing for the cause. You add salt carefully because salt is also rationed now. You put the lid on. You lower the heat as far as it will go. You will not open that lid for 3 hours. This is the siege in miniature. Patience as survival technique. While the daube cooks, you make bread. The grey flour. It weighs wrong in your hand. Too light somehow, as if it's been cut with something that isn't food but pretends to be. You've heard what is in it, from the woman at the distribution queue. Rice bran mostly, some dry potato flour. The government officially says it's a blend. The word they use is amelioration, improvement. You try not to think about what they're improving on. You mix it with water and a pinch of salt and the last of the levain, the sourdough starter you've been keeping alive since you arrived at the Moreaus, feeding it every day as if it were a pet, because it is in a way. It is alive. It converts the flour into bread by magic that is also biology, and it has been doing this reliably for a year and a half, through your arrival in Paris and through the summer of 1870, and through the declaration of war in July, and through the collapse of the empire, and through the siege. The levain is doing its best with the grey flour. You need the dough. Your hands know this. The push and fold and turn. The way the dough resists at first and then gives, developing its structure under your palms, the way the surface goes from rough to smooth, from sticky to workable. Your hands have done this 300 times, and they do it now without you having to think, which leaves your mind free to do what it does every morning during the bread making. Calculate. The flour will last, if you're careful, if you use the minimum for each loaf, perhaps 15 more days. Then you will be dependent entirely on the ration distribution from the Mary, which gives 300 grams per person per day, which is not nothing but is not enough. The lentils and dried beans will last longer. You have cooked them every way you know, and invented new ways since. Lentil soup with the turnips, bean ragout with the dried onion, legume dishes that the morose eat without enthusiasm, but with the steady determination of people who understand that enthusiasm is now a luxury. The 6 eggs are for emergency use only. You have been saying this since last week. You have not touched them. You shape the loaf and put it to rise near the stove. From the stove, the daub is beginning to speak in low murmurs. The smell is deepening. Meat and onion and turnip. The ancient vocabulary of French comfort cooking, now with the faint undertone that tells you it's hoarse, but only if you know what to listen for. You wipe your hands on your apron and sit down at the kitchen table for the first time all morning. Outside, another distant boom from the Prussian artillery. The window is thick with condensation. You trace a line through it with one finger and look through the clear streak at the courtyard, at Monsieur Moreau's turnips standing up bravely in their frozen rows. Still there, still growing. Monsieur Moreau comes down to the kitchen at noon. He does this sometimes now. Before the siege, he would never have come to the kitchen at noon on a weekday. He would have been at the Sorbonne, or in his study, or at the cafe with colleagues, and food would have appeared at meal times as if by a process he preferred not to think about. The siege has ended a lot of preferences. He stands in the kitchen doorway and breathes in. "That smells," he says carefully, "like something real." "It will be ready this evening," you say, "with the turnips." He nods. He's looking at the pot the way a man looks at something he wants to ask about but has decided not to. You tell him what he wants to know. "Horse, from the butcher on the Rue des Écoles." A pause. "They say," he says, "that the Romans used to eat horse regularly." "So did the Gauls," you say, "according to Caesar." He looks at you with an expression that is several things at once. Surprised that you know this. A professor being surprised that a servant has information is always a small comedy, but you're used to it, and also a kind of relief. Permission has been given. Someone has confirmed that eating horse is not barbaric but historical, which is exactly the kind of reassurance a man of Monsieur Moreau's training needs. "Well," he says, "excellent." He retreats to his study. You go back to the bread. It went in waves, the things that disappeared from the city. This is something you understood only in retrospect, looking back at October from November, and then looking back at October and November from December. At the time, each disappearance seemed individual, a specific shortage, a temporary absence, something that would come back. It only stopped looking temporary when you drew the whole map. The first wave, the luxury foods, this happened in September, quickly, almost overnight. The game birds that the Grand's restaurant served, the woodcock, the snipe, the partridge, the fine cheeses from Normandy and the Auvergne, the seasonal produce that normally arrived on the road from the south. These vanished by the 3rd week of September, as the supply chains were cut and the stockists quietly shifted their reserves. You barely noticed these. They were never part of your world. You had cooked them for the Moreaus on special occasions, but they were special occasions. This second wave. Beef, veal, pork. This is the one that hit. Beef first. By late September, the queue at the butcher on the Rue Monge was an hour long before opening, and the cuts were going fast. By early October, the better cuts, the entrecôte, the rôti, were gone before mid-morning. By mid-October, there was only the inferior cuts, and not much of those. By November, the beef was gone. What the butcher sold instead was horse, and listed it as cheval, because listing it as bœuf was illegal, and also pointless since nobody believed it. Veal and pork went at approximately the same time. Pigs had mostly been consumed by their owners in October, all across the city, in a kind of private October feast that left tens of thousands of households meatless, and had been in retrospect a mistake driven by the feeling that they should eat it while they could. Veal lingered a few weeks longer, then it was gone. Milk and butter, October. Real butter gone completely. Real milk gone except the tiny quantities being kept for infants, which the Mary began to control by decree. What replaced them? The whitish butter substitute, the milk substitute that was mostly water. These arrived simultaneously with the disappearance of the real things, as if the city had been preparing both tracks at once. This is the thing that frightened you most about the substitutes. How ready they were. Someone had planned for this. Someone in the government, or in the distribution system, had anticipated the moment when butter would be gone and had arranged a replacement. They hadn't told anyone about the replacement because telling anyone would have caused panic. But it was ready. That readiness meant someone had done the calculation. Someone had looked at the siege, looked at the food stores, done the math and concluded, we will run out of butter by this date. We will run out of beef by this date. The math had been done. You found this both reassuring and terrifying. Cheese followed butter, more slowly but steadily. The hard cheeses lasted into October. The soft cheeses, which couldn't be kept, went by mid-September. By November, what you could get at the creamery was a hard, sharp, slightly rancid thing that was technically cheese in the way that everything was technically its category now. Chickens, in October, became briefly abundant as people slaughtered their garden flocks rather than spend money feeding them through the winter. For 2 weeks in October, there were chickens everywhere. This moment of strange plenty that everyone understood was not plenty but consumption of the future. And then the chickens were gone, and their absence was permanent. And dogs. The dogs. You need to think about the dogs for a moment, because this is the thing that tells you something about what siege does to a city's ethics. Not the dramatic things, not yet, not the zoo, not the rats, the dogs. Paris had, by some estimates, 80,000 dogs before the siege. Street dogs, owned dogs, shop dogs, the toy dogs of the bourgeois, the large working dogs of the butchers and carters, the hunting dogs of the aristocracy who had not yet fled. By November, the dog population was perhaps a third of that. The rest had gone into pots, not talked about publicly, not admitted to. When the disappearance of individual dogs was noted, when someone's neighbour's terrier was last seen being led somewhere by a man with an unfamiliar face, it was discussed with the specific careful vagueness of a city that has agreed not to look at something too directly. But in the queues, where all real information circulated, people talked about dogs the way they talked about every food source now. Practically. how to prepare them, which breeds were supposed to be better, whether a stew was better than a braise, whether the flavour was close to rabbit, whether you needed to soak the meat in milk first. You had not yet cooked dog. You were not yet quite at dog. But you knew where the line was, and you knew you were approaching it, and you knew that the line was moving. December arrives the way hardship always does, as a confirmation of something you already knew was coming. The temperature drops to -7 Celsius on the 1st of December and stays there for 3 days. Then it drops further. The Seine freezes. Not completely, not enough to walk on, not yet, but the edges thicken with ice, and the barges that usually work the river are stuck, and the watermen who ferry people across the narrower channels are working double hours in conditions that would, in any other year, have caused them to stay home. The cold is a separate problem from the food, and it is also the same problem, because cold requires fuel, and fuel is almost gone. You're making decisions now that would have been incomprehensible to you in August. Which pieces of furniture are structurally important to the apartment and which can be sacrificed? There is a chair in Monsieur Moreau's study, an old armchair, worn that he never sits in, that you have been looking at for 3 weeks. Last week you finally asked him about it. He looked at the chair for a long moment. "It belonged to my mother," he said. A pause. "But she is dead," he said, "and we are not. Take the chair." The chair burned well. It lasted 4 days. The cold also changes what the body needs. You are cooking with fat wherever you can find it, rendering every scrap of fat from whatever meat you can obtain. The body, in cold like this, burns through food faster. You are feeding 4 adults, and you're watching their faces get thinner, and you're doing the mathematics every morning, and the mathematics is not good. Edouard comes home on leave every 4th day now. He is thinner than you have ever seen him. His uniform hangs on him. The Garde Nationale units, he tells you, are getting rations, but the rations are barely enough. The men in his company have started foraging, going out to the parts of the city that haven't been completely stripped yet, to whatever gardens and allotments there are. He sits at the kitchen table when he comes home and eats whatever you put in front of him with a focused mechanical urgency that is nothing like the way he used to eat in the old days, when he would complain that the sauce wasn't quite right or the potatoes were undercooked. One evening in early December, he sits down to a bowl of turnip soup with a small amount of horse meat shredded into it, and he eats it in approximately 90 seconds, and then he puts down the spoon and his hands are shaking slightly. "They're eating their belts," he says. "Who?" "The men in my unit. The leather. They boil it to get the..." He stops. There's something in leather, apparently, that the body can use. Fat that's been treated into it during the tanning. They soak it for hours and boil it and... He stops again. You think about this later, alone in the kitchen, and you think, there is always another step. You think there is a line you will not cross, and then you find out there is another line beyond it, and another beyond that, and the siege keeps moving the lines, and the people who told you leather belts were not food now know that leather belts are technically food. The queue at the horse butcher is longer now. 3 blocks long on some mornings. The horse butcher has extended his hours. He is, you have gathered from the queue conversation, going through his stock faster than he expected because the city's horse population is being consumed faster than anyone expected. And the question of what happens when the horse runs out is not yet being asked out loud, but it is being asked in the back of everyone's mind. You meet Madame Viardot in the queue regularly now. She's become a friend of the queue. One of those relationships that exists entirely in one specific context and would not survive outside it, but within that context has the warmth of real friendship. She has, she tells you, eaten cat. She says it the way someone says a true thing they have decided they are no longer going to be ashamed of. My neighbour's cat, she says. Well, I say my neighbour's. It was living in our building. It had been living in our building since October, and I suspect most of the other families were thinking the same thing I was thinking. I simply acted first. A pause. It was not bad, she says. Similar to rabbit in a way. Smaller. The bones are very fine. You think of the cat that lives in the bakery on the corner, or used to live there. You haven't seen it in 2 weeks. You don't ask Madame Viardot how you prepare a cat, but she tells you anyway. You skin it the same way you skin a rabbit, she says. It's really the same process. You don't think about what it is, you think about what it needs. A long braise, I think, with whatever aromatics you have. The cue moves forward. The worst part, she says, is the sound it makes when you... She stops. No. Actually, the worst part was afterwards. When I sat down to eat and there was nothing else and I ate it and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. And I thought, what else have I decided is impossible that isn't? She picks up her basket. The rats are next, I think, she says, for all of us. You hear about the zoo on December 14th. It comes through the queue, as everything comes through the queue, travelling from person to person, like all the real news of the siege, faster and more reliable than the official bulletins. The zoo, the Jardin des Plantes, the great natural history garden on the left bank, 2 streets from the river, has been under pressure since October. The animals eat a great deal. The city, which is struggling to feed people, is also struggling to feed 200 lions and tigers and elephants and zebras and snakes and bears and God knows what else, maintained through the siege in their enclosures and fed on the same dwindling food stores as everyone else. The decision has apparently been made at the municipal level, to begin disposing of the zoo animals for food. This is not as simple as it sounds. You want to understand what is being suggested here. The Jardin des Plantes is not just a zoo in the modern sense. It is the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle. It contains animals that were gifts from foreign governments. Animals that are the only specimens of their kind in Europe. Scientists have been studying these animals for generations. The menagerie has been there since the Revolution, when the royal menagerie at Versailles was brought to Paris and declared public property, one of the better things the Revolution did. And now the question is, can the people of Paris eat them? The scientists apparently have been fighting this with everything they have. The zoologists and naturalists of the museum have been writing memos and attending meetings and arguing loudly that these animals are irreplaceable specimens of natural history, that once eaten they are gone forever, that this is not a decision that can be undone. The municipal authorities have been listening to these arguments and weighing them against the specific and immediate fact that there are people in Paris who are hungry. The hunger is winning. The first animals to go are the ones that the scientists, after extensive internal debate, declare least scientifically irreplaceable. The zebra, the yak, the wapiti, a large North American deer, the wildebeest. You hear about this second-hand from Madame Viardot, who heard it from her neighbour, who has a cousin who works near the Jardin des Plantes. They took the zebra yesterday, she says. 3 of them. The boucherie anglaise, the horse butcher on the boulevard Haussmann. They bought them, had them slaughtered on site. The boucherie anglaise, the English butcher shop. It sounds like a joke. in the middle of a war. The zebra, you say. They say it's very like horse. Very similar muscle structure, apparently, which makes sense. It's all in the same family of animals. She gestures vaguely, as if invoking taxonomy. Can you buy it? At the shop. You can buy it? 11 francs a kilo. 11 francs a kilo? You think about the Moreau housekeeping money? 4 francs and 20 centimes, that was today. Horse shoulder is 2 francs 80. 11 francs a kilo is... Who is buying it, you ask? At 11 francs. Madame Viardot gives you a significant look. Who do you think? The Grand's restaurants are still operating. This is one of the stranger facts of the siege, one that you have to hold alongside the other facts without letting the contradiction destabilize you. While people in the poorer arrondissements are eating cats and rats and bread made with bone flour, the restaurants of the right bank, the Café de Paris, the Grand Véfour, Voisins on the Rue Saint-Honoré, the Tour d'Argent, are still operating. They are still seating customers. They are still producing food. The food has changed, but it is still being produced with the specific ingenuity and resources of people who have money and who, crucially, have the contacts and the connections to acquire unusual ingredients. You know about Voisins because Edouard told you. He had been on duty near the Rue Saint-Honoré, and he had looked in through the window, not able to enter obviously on his Garde Nationale pay, and seen a menu displayed. He memorized it the way you memorize things that seem important without knowing why. Buffalo rôti, he said. That's buffalo. Antelope en civet, antelope stew, kangaroo sauté à l'anglaise. Kangaroo, said Madame Moreau, who was in the room. Sautéed in the English style, Edouard said. Whatever that means. How much? You asked. For what? The kangaroo. He blinked. I don't know. I didn't go in. A pause. A lot. More than we have. You think about this. The kangaroo. The zoo is being eaten, but it's being eaten at 2 different speeds and in 2 different price brackets. The scientific specimens of the Jardin des Plantes are being sold to the expensive restaurants and to the butchers who supply the expensive restaurants and to the households that can afford 11 francs a kilo. And everyone else is managing on horse, on cat, on the bread that weighs wrong. This is not surprising. Sieges have always worked this way. The rich suffer more slowly and more comfortably, and they still call it suffering, and from the inside it probably is. But knowing this doesn't change it. December 20th. You're in the queue at the Mary distribution point. An hour's wait. 200 grams of the grey bread. A small amount of dried beans. When the woman next to you says it. They've sold the elephants. A silence moves through the nearby section of the queue, the way silence moves through any crowd that has just heard something that requires a moment of processing. Which elephants? Says the man behind you. The Jardin des Plantes elephants. Castor and Pollux. The young ones, sold to the Boucherie Anglaise. Castor and Pollux. You know who Castor and Pollux are. Were. The whole city knows. They were young Asian elephants who have been at the zoo since they arrived from Indochina 3 years ago. The children of Paris know them. Families visit them on Sundays. They are possibly the most famous animals in the city. How much? Asks the woman in the fur coat, the one who knows about horse shoulder. 27,000 francs, says the woman who brought the news, for the 2 of them. 27,000 francs, the man behind you repeats. The carcasses alone must weigh, begins someone doing mental arithmetic. 700 kilos each approximately, says a voice further back in the queue, with the specific confidence of someone who's been thinking about exactly this calculation. 700 kilos of elephant meat at the prices the boucherie anglaise would charge. You do not do the full calculation, but even imprecisely it is an enormous sum. The queue moves forward. The scientists are furious, says the woman in the fur coat. The scientists, says the man behind you, are not as hungry as the rest of us. The scientists, says the woman who brought the news, apparently wrote a letter to the mayor saying that it was an irreversible act against the patrimony of natural history. And the mayor signed the sale order. The queue reaches the distribution window. You collect your bread and your beans. On the way home, you pass the Jardin des Plantes. You stop at the gate and look in. The garden is open. It has stayed open through the siege, an act of civic normalcy that the city seems to need. And the paths are clear in the winter morning. The bare trees, the frost on the grass. From somewhere deeper in the garden, an animal sound. Something large, but not elephants. The elephants are being slaughtered this morning somewhere near the Boucherie Anglaise on the boulevard Haussmann, in a process that you understand involves a significant amount of professional butchery skill, because the anatomy of an elephant is not something most Parisian butchers have studied. You stand at the gate for a moment. A small girl, maybe 4 years old, is tugging her mother's hand and pointing into the garden. "Where is l'éléphant?" she's asking. "I want to see l'éléphant." Her mother is avoiding the answer with a specific technique of a parent who has been avoiding an answer for several days. Later, the mother says, "Come, we need to get to the distribution." They walk away. You stay at the gate for another moment. Then you go home. The elephant meat arrives in the shops, such as the shops that receive it. The Boucherie Anglaise primarily, and a few select establishments they supply on December 22nd. You go. Of course you go, not for the meat. At the prices they are charging, far beyond anything you can justify with the Moreau housekeeping, you're not buying elephant. But you go to look, because not looking would feel like something you owed a debt to. The queue at the Boucherie Anglaise on the boulevard Haussmann is extraordinary. Not because it is long, though it is long, stretching half a block, but because of who is in it. People who are never in queues. People in good coats, real coats, coats that have been kept well even in the siege. Silk hats in some cases, which are ridiculous in December and in a siege, but which their owners seem to feel make a statement. Young men with the slightly crazed look of people who have decided this is an experience and are going to have it fully. And alongside them, workers. People in rough clothing, not the special occasion rough clothing of the artisan on a Sunday, but the working rough clothing of people who came in from the labouring arrondissements for the specific purpose of seeing this. The meat is displayed in the window. It is grey-brown and very large. You think it looks like beef. That is the first thing. The cuts look like beef cuts. The same shapes, more or less, because a leg is a leg and a shoulder is a shoulder regardless of what animal it came from. But the pieces are bigger, the slabs are thicker, the colour is slightly different, deeper in some ways, and there is something about the texture you can see even from here that is different. The sign says Viande d'éléphant, Castor at Pollock's, because they kept the names on, because the butcher understood that half of what was being sold was the story, the price, 45 francs per kilo for the trunk. 14 francs for the standard cuts, 40 francs for the paws, which are apparently considered a delicacy. You watch the people buying it. A man in a silk cravat, a banker or merchant from the look of him, buys half a kilo of trunk. He pays with coins that he takes from a leather purse that is still full when he puts it back in his pocket. A family, husband and wife and an adult son, buy one of the larger cuts, something from the haunch. The husband and wife are talking quietly and urgently, clearly having a brief argument about the price, clearly ending with the decision to do it anyway, because this is once in a lifetime, and once in a lifetime is sometimes worth a month's food budget. A young woman, your age, your class by the look of her coat, stands at the window for a long time looking at the meat. She has her hand on her purse. She does not buy anything. After a while she turns and walks away, and you think she made the right decision, but also you understand completely why she had to stand there and look first. You do not buy elephant. You walk home. You think about the trunk, 45 francs per kilo, in the window. The muscles that once lifted and pulled and touched and learned, now cut and priced and wrapped in paper. You think about the small girl at the garden gate. L'éléphant. Where is l'éléphant? You tell yourself this is war. You tell yourself this is survival. You tell yourself that the scientists are right in an absolute sense and wrong in a practical one, and that the people who ate Castor and Pollux were not monsters and not heroes, but just hungry people who had the money. You tell yourself that the small girl will forget, that children always forget. You believe approximately half of this. Christmas, 1870. In another year, the Moreaus would have been at their daughter's house in Lyon, which is where they spend Christmas every year, their daughter having married a lawyer there in 1867. There would have been the traditional réveillon dinner, the oysters, the foie gras, the turkey stuffed with chestnuts, the bûche de Noël. These things would have existed. In this year their daughter is in Lyon. The city is under siege, and you're in the kitchen at 7 in the morning on December 25th, staring at a very small piece of horse meat that Madame Moreau acquired somewhere. She did not tell you where, wrapped in a scrap of newspaper. Merry Christmas. You will make the best Christmas dinner you can. The piece of horse meat is about half a kilo. There are the last of the lentils. There are 3 of the precious eggs. Madame Moreau has released 3 of the 6 for the occasion. There is a piece of hard, sharp cheese that Edouard brought from somewhere on his last leave. Provenance unknown. You will make a soup from the lentils and the horse meat, with the turnips. Monsieur Moreau's garden has yielded 6 more. A small omelette from the eggs, with the slice of the cheese, bread. And then you will not make any of that, because Edouard arrives at 9 in the morning with a package under his arm, and the package changes things. He puts it on the kitchen table. He looks at you with an expression that is about 6 things at once. Rats, he says. You look at the package. How many, you ask. 4, he says. Big ones, from the sewer hunters. He pauses. I've been told they're good. These sewer ones, they eat grain, apparently in the grain warehouses, better than the street rats. Who told you? Everyone. It's what people are doing in our unit. The men who've tried it. He hesitates. There's a market near the Hôtel de Ville. I went last week. It seemed... He stops. It seemed like you should know about it, he finishes. In case things get worse. In case things get worse. You unwrap the package. The rats are dead. Of course they are dead. And have already been cleaned by whoever the sewer hunter was who caught them. They look, stripped of their fur, not entirely unlike a very small rabbit. This is what everyone says about them, apparently. Like small rabbits. The muscle structure, the size, the proportion. You look at them for a long time. Here is the thing about the moment when you decide to cook the rats. It is not dramatic. This is what the books get wrong when they talk about people eating strange things in extremity. They make it sound like a dramatic decision, a moment of crisis, the line being crossed with great weight and significance. What actually happens is you have 4 dead rats on your kitchen table, and you have a household to feed, and it is Christmas, and those are the ingredients you have, and so you cook them. The decision is already made before you know you've made it. You skin them. Edward helps, looking slightly grey but determined, telling himself a story about Roman legions and historical necessity. And you cut them into pieces, and you braise them in the stock with the thyme and the turnips and the last scraps of horse fat. And after an hour in the pot, they smell not bad at all, actually. They smell like small game, like something gamey and rich. And after 2 hours, they smell like dinner. Madame Moreau does not come to the kitchen all morning. She comes when you call her to the table. She looks at the dish. "What is it?" she asks carefully. "A ragout," you say. "From the market." She sits down. She picks up her fork. She eats. She does not ask again. The rat market exists. You go eventually 2 weeks after Christmas. It is near the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville, as Edward said, and it has been there since early December, though you had heard rumours of it since November. It is not hidden. This is the first thing that surprises you. It is not in an alleyway, not discreet, not the secret transaction of people doing something they're ashamed of. It is a row of stalls set up in the street, with the same casual normalcy as the turnip vendors and the dried bean sellers. The rat hunters are a specific subculture of the siege that you have learned about in pieces. The professional ratiers, rat catchers, have existed in Paris for decades. They work the sewers and the granaries and the abattoirs, catching rats for sale to the terrier dogs that wealthy men keep for rat baiting, a sport that will strike future generations as bewildering, but which in 1870 is a perfectly respectable working-class entertainment. In normal times, the ratiers sell their catches to the dog sport enthusiasts. In siege times, they found a much larger market. The rat market has its own logic, its own pricing, its own quality distinctions. Sewer rats, which eat grain and vegetable matter in the warehouses along the quays, are considered better than street rats, which eat everything. This is not snobbery. It is a genuine quality distinction. What an animal eats affects what it tastes like. The sewer hunters can charge more for a grain-fed sewer rat, and they do. Price: 50 centimes for a large sewer rat, 30 centimes for medium, 20 for the small ones, which are not worth cooking for a household of adults, though the sellers assure you they're suitable for soup. You buy 4 large ones, paying 2 francs. You also buy, because this is now available, because the siege has found a market for everything, a small printed pamphlet, one of several being sold nearby, titled "Recipes for the Preparation of Rat, according to the methods of the best cuisiniers." You're not making this up. The pamphlet, it costs 2 centimes, has been written by someone with genuine cooking knowledge. The recipes include rat sauté à la Robert in a sauce of onion and mustard, rat civet in the manner of jugged hare, rat brochettes on skewers, which the pamphlet concedes is for the more adventurous palate. You read it on the way home. You have crossed a line, multiple lines, and on the other side the lines look different than they did from the approach. You're not the person who would have picked up this pamphlet in August. You're not the person who would have considered rat civet a viable recipe option. You're a different version of yourself assembled from the same raw materials under different conditions. The siege is making you. New Year's Eve, 1870. Edouard takes you to the ramparts. It is his idea, and Madame Moreau doesn't know about it. And it is probably against several regulations and possibly against basic common sense. But Edouard has a way of making things sound adventurous rather than dangerous. And you are 19 years old, and it is New Year's Eve, and you have been inside this apartment for most of the last 3 months, and you say yes. The ramparts, the old fortification walls that ring Paris, the thickened ring of stone and earthwork that is supposed to defend the city, are manned by the Garde Nationale, which means Edouard knows people there, which means getting up onto the walkway is a matter of being recognised and nodded through. The cold is extraordinary. Up here, above the rooftops, the wind comes in from the northwest without obstruction and hits you with the specific malice of a Parisian December, which is colder than it has any right to be this far south. Your coat is buttoned to the throat. Your hands are in your pockets. Your breath makes clouds that the wind takes immediately. Edouard stands beside you at the parapet. Below and behind you, Paris. 2 million people's worth of candlelight and cookfire smoke, spreading south and east and west in a grid of streets and buildings that has been growing for 1,000 years, that is still growing even now, because cities do not stop being cities because they are besieged. The gas lamps are mostly still running. The city has its own gasworks inside the walls, and the boulevards glow their amber orange along their lengths, and the dome of the Pantheon is visible from here, and the towers of Notre Dame, and further west the half-built tower of the Sacré-Cœur that someone began before the war and hasn't gotten back to. And ahead of you, nothing. No, not nothing. Fires. Fires stretching from the southwest to the north, a broken necklace of orange light sitting on the dark hills beyond the walls, miles away and yet entirely present, the Prussian encampment, the most advanced and organised army in the world, sitting in its neat formations on the high ground of Versailles and Bagneux and Saint-Denis, cooking its dinner and polishing its guns and waiting. Just waiting. It has been waiting since September 19th. 105 days of waiting. 200,000 Prussian soldiers who eat full rations every day, who are warm in their tents, who receive mail from home, whose supply lines run all the way back to Germany uninterrupted, who are under no orders to do anything except stay there until the city runs out of food. How long, you ask? Edouard is quiet for a moment. There are estimates, he says, from the military. I've heard, from men in my unit who've talked to officers, that the food stores can last until late January, maybe February, if the rationing gets stricter. It's been getting stricter every month. It can get stricter still. You look at the Prussian fires. They know too, you say. They've done the same calculations. Of course they've done the calculations. They're German. He says this without bitterness, almost admiringly. They're very good at calculations. You think about the calculations you do every morning in the kitchen. The flour, the lentils, the dried beans, the firewood that is running out, the coal that is not stopping. You think about the rats in their brown paper, about the pamphlet with the rat civet recipe, about Madame Viardot's cat, about the elephant trunk in the shop window at 45 francs a kilo. You think about Castor and Pollux. Below you, in the dark city, someone has started singing. A group of people, soldiers you think from the sound of it, singing something that is slow and defiant and slightly off-key, rising up through the cold air to where you stand on the wall. La Marseillaise, Edouard says. They always sing it at midnight. The fires on the hills do not move. The Prussians have their own celebrations, you suppose, their own songs in their own language, their own fires around which they stand and look toward the city and think their own thoughts. We'll surrender, Edouard says quietly, not a question. Probably, you say, when it gets worse enough. When it gets worse enough. Neither of you says anything for a while. The singing below grows louder as midnight approaches, and other voices join it. And by the time the church bells begin to ring, all the churches ringing the new year in, those famous overlapping peals that you heard on your first morning in Paris, and that have been marking time throughout the siege, a continuity in the middle of everything. The singing is everywhere below you, rolling up the stone walls of the city and over the ramparts and out into the cold air toward the Prussian fires. 1871, the year in which Paris surrendered. Although you don't know that yet, you are standing on the wall in the cold with Edouard, and you are watching the Prussian fires, and you're thinking about all the things you've eaten that you never thought you'd eat, and you're 19 years old, and the war is not over. The church bells stop. The singing goes on a little longer, ragged and stubborn, and then it too falls quiet. The fires on the hills burn on. Happy New Year, Edouard says. Happy New Year, you say. January 1871. The bread has changed again. It changed in October. It changed in November. In January it changes one more time. And this time the change is visible and inarguable and impossible to pretend away. It is dark. Not grey-brown, as it was in December. Genuinely dark. The colour of mud. The colour of something that has been through more processes than wheat should go through before becoming bread. It does not have the specific smell of bread. The yeasty, warm, slightly sharp smell of fermentation and heat that your levain produces. It has a smell that is more like earth, more like something that has not fully surrendered the idea of being something other than food. You bring a loaf back from the Mary distribution on January 4th and put it on the kitchen table, and the Moreaus look at it. What is it? Madame Moreau says, not a question. The official statement, you say, says it is bread. You pause. They have added oat bran, and you stop. They have added other things. The other things, according to the woman in the queue who has a cousin who works at one of the grinding mills, rice straw. The cellulose extracted from the stalks by a process that technically releases some nutritional value. Also, crushed bone. Also, reportedly, and this one you're less sure about because it sounds like rumour, like the kind of thing a queue produces in its long hours of waiting, chalk. What you do not say, that the woman in the queue told you that one of the bakers near the Porte Saint-Martin has been mixing his bread with sawdust. Sawdust has no nutritional value whatsoever. It simply fills space. It makes the bread heavier, makes the loaf seem larger, and it gives the body something to do while processing it, which is not the same as feeding the body. The Moreaus look at the bread. Edouard picks it up, breaks off a piece, chews it. His face does something complicated. It's fine, he says. It's bread. You can eat it. He takes another bite. You can eat it, he repeats, as if he's reminding himself. You make soup from the last of the dried beans and serve it with slices of the dark bread, and everyone eats. This is January. The cold, meanwhile, continues its separate assault. The Seine freezes, not just at the edges, all the way across. In early January, the temperature drops to -15 on some nights, and the river, which is fed by water coming through pipes from the Marne and the Ourcq and the Van, locks into solid blue-grey ice. You see people walking across it. This is extraordinary. The Seine has not frozen solid within Paris since 1829, 40 years ago. But here it is, the wide silver road running through the heart of the city, as solid underfoot as stone. People go out onto it. They cannot help themselves. They take children. They stand on what is usually water and look up at the bridges and the buildings from a perspective they have never had before. And the novelty of it for a moment overcomes everything else. The hunger, the cold, the Prussian fires on the hills. You go out onto the Seine on January 7th, in the afternoon between the morning errands and the cooking of dinner. The ice under your feet is opaque and thick, and it creaks slightly when a group of people moves past, but it holds. It has been holding for several days, and it will hold for several more. You stand in the middle of the river and look at Paris. From here, from the water, the city is as beautiful as it has ever been. The towers of Notre Dame rising from the Ile de la Cité, the bridges, the quays and the bookstalls and the facades of the buildings that have been here for centuries and that are still here. The Prussians have not bombed Paris yet. This too is about to change, but you don't know that standing on ice, and the city looks whole, looks intact, looks like the city it has always been, the most beautiful city in the world, sitting on its frozen river in January. It is starving, but it is beautiful while it starves, which has always been something Paris is very good at. Your feet are going numb on the ice. You walk back to the bank. You go home to cook dinner from what is left. January 5th, 1871. The Prussians begin shelling the city. You're in the kitchen when the first shell falls, and you do not know what it is. Not immediately. There is a sound that is different from the artillery you have been hearing at a distance since September, a closer sound, a sound with a different quality to it. Then there is a second sound somewhere to the south, which you understand even before you have thought about it as an impact. Something landing. You stand at the kitchen stove. The second shell lands closer. The third shell, this is confirmed later by the news that moves through the queues, lands in the 6th arrondissement, in the Rue d'Assas. It kills 2 people. The Prussians are bombing Paris. This was always possible, theoretically. There had been debate in the Prussian High Command. You know none of this at the time, but it comes out later, about whether bombing a civilian city was militarily useful, strategically sound, morally defensible. The German generals had different views. Bismarck, who was running the political side of the war, had been pushing for the bombardment as a psychological weapon. It is effective as a psychological weapon. You stand in the kitchen. You do not move. This is not courage. It is the specific paralysis of someone whose body is not sure what to do and has defaulted to stillness. Then another shell. Closer. You go to the cellar. The Moreaus are already there. Monsieur Moreau with a candle and 2 of his most precious books. Madame Moreau with a blanket, which she hands to you when you come down the stairs with an automatic practicality that you find both touching and characteristic. The cellar is low and cold and smells of the wine that used to be in it, all consumed now. You sit on the bottom step with a blanket around you and listen to the bombardment continue. It is not constant. That would be easier to cope with, perhaps, if it were constant. Your body could adjust to the rhythm of it. Instead, it comes in sequences, 4 or 5 shells in quick succession then silence, then 3 more, then a longer silence, then resuming. The mind during the silences is doing the same thing the body does in the cold, tensing in anticipation of what it knows is coming. The bombardment focuses on the south of the city, the 5th, the 6th, the 13th arrondissements, the Latin Quarter, the Pantheon area. This is in some ways your area. The shelling falls primarily south of the river, where the population is densest. It continues for 20 days. It kills, in total, about 400 people. Fewer than the hunger kills. Hunger is less dramatic, but more efficient. But it changes something. The shells are a new fact. The city has been containing the siege for 4 months with a specific form of stoicism. This is happening. We cannot change it. We endure. The shells disturb that containment. They make it literal. They put the war inside the walls. People move north. The right bank arrondissements, less targeted, fill up with refugees from the 5th and 6th. The queues get longer because the queues have more people in them. The Moreaux stay. So do you. Where would you go? This is Paris. The streets to anywhere else are held by the Prussians. You're inside the city the way you are inside a fact. January 12th. The pantry. You've been over the pantry so many times now that the counting is automatic, almost unconscious. A quick look, an immediate tally. Like a language you have spoken for so long it is no longer translation but thought. What is left? 2 kilos of the grey dark bread flour, or something that calls itself flour. 4 or 5 days if you bake it all, which you will because waiting serves no purpose. A small amount of rice, perhaps a kilo, 3 days. No lentils. The lentils are gone as of January 8th. No dried beans, gone since January 3rd. The tinned sardines, the tin from before the siege, the one you have been saving. It is still there. It has been there since September. You have moved it to the back of the shelf, then moved it forward again, then back. It is the last thing from the old world, the world before. Opening it would mean acknowledging that there is nothing else being saved. You have not opened it. 2 eggs, the 6 have become 2, used over the weeks for small emergencies for Christmas, for the one time Monsieur Moreau was ill and needed something easily digestible. Salt. Thyme, very little, dried and crumbling. A bay leaf that is more memory than herb. That is it. The meat, whatever meat you acquire from the queue, is the variable. The daily problem. The thing that requires going out into the cold every morning and standing in a queue and hoping. The horse is becoming scarce. Paris came into the siege with perhaps 65,000 horses. The military had already commandeered many. The food shortage has consumed most of the rest. The queues at the horse butcher are longer, and the cuts are worse, and the price has gone up to 4 francs a kilo for the shoulder. There are, you've heard, emergency ration distributions planned by the municipal government. They have been planned before, they have not arrived yet. You close the pantry door, you go to the Mairie distribution and queue for 90 minutes in the snow. It has been snowing since the 9th, which adds another layer of cold to the cold, and come back with the daily bread ration and a small amount of dried potato flour that the distribution worker says is supplemental, and which you cannot cook with without it turning into a paste the consistency of wallpaper adhesive. You make soup with the potato flour and the water and the last of the thyme. It tastes like nothing that the word soup has ever meant. The Moreaus eat it. You eat it. January 19th, 1871. The French army attempts its last major sortie. The Battle of Buzenval in the hills west of Paris. 90,000 men, the Garde Nationale, and whatever remains of the regular army go out through the gates in the early morning. Edouard is among them. You know this when he leaves for duty on the 18th. The specific quality of his silence when he kisses his mother's cheek, the way he looks at the apartment as if counting it. The battle lasts 1 day. The French forces are pushed back. Several thousand men are killed or wounded. The Prussian line holds. The gates close behind the returning army. Edouard comes back on the 22nd. He is unhurt in his body. He comes into the kitchen and sits down at the table, and you make him the soup, the terrible soup, the nothing soup, and he eats it without speaking. Then he says, "That's it. I know," you say. "The armistice is coming. Days." "I know." He looks at the kitchen walls, at the empty pantry shelf visible through the open door. "I'm sorry," he says, which is a strange thing to say, and you don't entirely know what he's apologizing for. For the war, for the siege, for the failure of the sortie, for the terrible soup. Maybe for all of it. "It wasn't your fault," you say, which is equally strange and equally insufficient. He nods. He eats the last of the soup. The armistice is signed on January 28th, 1871. 131 days after the encirclement of Paris. The gates open, February 3rd, 1871, you're at Les Halles. The great market hall in the first arrondissement, the belly of Paris, Zola will call it, a few years from now, in a novel he's already planning, is open. Not fully, not yet. The stalls are sparsely stocked. The trains are running again, barely, and the first food shipments are arriving from the countryside that spent 4 months watching Paris starve from a distance. But there is food, real food. You are standing in front of a stall with actual butter on it. Real butter, yellow and solid and properly shaped, a cylinder wrapped in cloth. And you are standing very still because something in you needs a moment before you pick it up. Real butter. You haven't seen it since October. The woman selling it watches you with the expression of someone who has seen this reaction many times this week. You buy 200 grams, at a price that would have seemed criminal in July and seems entirely reasonable now. You put it in your basket. Next to it, a vegetable seller has leeks and carrots, and you stop. Actual parsnips, fat white ones, freshly dug. And next to him, a butcher, a real butcher, with real beef. You stand at the counter and look at the beef. It is the same deep red that beef has always been, the colour you knew before September, and forgot gradually through October and November and December and January, replaced in your memory by the grey-pink of a horse and the dark red-brown of rat. The smell of it is familiar in a way that hits the back of your throat. "Madame?" says the butcher. You buy 1/2 kilo of shoulder. Not because it is the most economical choice, though it is, but because the shoulder is what you know, what you've been cooking in all its variants and substitutes and approximations for 4 months, and the shoulder is what will tell you whether you're really back. You take it home, in the kitchen, alone, before anyone else is up. You unwrap the beef shoulder on the counter. The smell of it fills the kitchen. You put your hands on the meat, feel the texture, firmer than horse, denser, the grain running differently. Feel the cold of it, and the weight, which is the weight of something that is what it is. You take the knife, you begin to work. The knife through the meat, the pieces falling apart, the fat trimmed, rendered in the pan. The smell of rendering beef fat is something your body responds to before your mind has processed it, a response from some part of you that is older than thought. The pieces browned, the sugars caramelizing, the colour deepening. The onion. There is a real onion, not the dried scraps you've been using, but a fresh yellow onion, slightly soft from storage, but real, with the papery gold skin and the sharp, clean smell when you cut through it. The stock, made yesterday, from the beef bones the butcher gave you for free with the shoulder, because the butcher is giving bones away free this week to everyone who comes in. A gesture that is not just commercial, but something else. Something that is the city acknowledging what the city went through. You add the stock. You add the onion. You add, because you bought herbs from the market, real dried herbs, properly dried, not the dust you've been using. Thyme, bay, a sprig of rosemary. You put the lid on. You lower the heat. You sit down at the kitchen table. The kitchen smells like food. Real food. The food that food is supposed to smell like. Outside, Paris is waking up. You can hear the carts on the cobblestones, supply carts, food carts, the commerce of a city restarting itself after 4 months of starvation. The church bells ringing the hour, the sounds you know, different from the sounds of the siege, different from the shuffling queues and the distant artillery and the rats in the walls and the single bell announcing the Garde Nationale formations, but recognizable. The same city, still there. Monsieur Moreau comes to the kitchen door. He stands there, breathes in. He doesn't say anything for a moment. Bœuf? He says. Yes, you say. Actual bœuf. He looks at you, and in his face there are about 4 months of everything. Of the grey bread and the terrible soup and the horse called bœuf and the rats in the brown paper and the shells landing and the fires on the hills, and then he nods. Good, he says. That's good. He goes back to his study. You listen to the daub, the official numbers, when they come out over the next months and years. The siege of Paris lasted 131 days. Approximately 80,000 Parisians died during the siege. Not all from hunger. Disease, which follows malnutrition, took many. Cold took some. The bombardment took 400. The city consumed over those months. Approximately 65,000 horses. Tens of thousands of cats and dogs, though these were never officially counted because officially they never happened. Estimates of rat consumption run from 500,000 to 1 million, though the rat hunters themselves probably had a better count. The zoo, 657 animals were killed for food, castor and pollux. One hippopotamus, whose owner refused to sell her because she'd been raised with him since childhood, and who survived the siege and lived another 40 years. The big cats, the lions and tigers, were not eaten because the zoo's keepers argued successfully that the danger of slaughtering them outweighed the food value, and the Prussian shells that fell in the Jardin des Plantes in January didn't reach the carnivore cages. The fish in the museum's aquarium were eaten. You had not known about the aquarium, with its fish and its eels and its freshwater specimens, until the story came out later. The story of the museum staff eating their way through the collection with the same systematic grief as the butchery of castor and pollux. But also, one of the naturalists later wrote, with a certain professional interest. We knew everything about these fish, he wrote. We had studied them for years. We knew how they swam and how they fed and how they bred. We didn't know until the siege that the common carp is best prepared with a mustard sauce. 131 days, and then the Commune, which is a different story, a more violent and complicated story, which begins in March 1871, and which will tear the city open in different ways. Not hunger this time, but politics and class and everything that the siege compressed and distorted and stored. But that is next spring. And right now it is February and the daub is on the stove. Here is the thing that stays with you. Not the rats, though you remember the rats. Not the elephant in the shop window, though you remember that too, every time you see anything that costs 45 francs. Not the dark bread that tasted of earth and chalk and things that were not bread. What stays is the levain, your sourdough starter, the jar of wild yeast culture that you have been feeding with flour every day since you arrived at the Morose, that has been converting flour into bread and bread into sustenance. It survived the siege. Through all of it, you fed it with the grey flour when there was no other flour, and it adapted, taking what it was given and converting it into the acid-warm culture of leave fermentation. It made the dark bread rise as best it could. It was alive, and it stayed alive. In April, when the real flour returns, the white wheat flour milled properly, the flour that actually belongs in bread, you feed it to the levain for the first time in months, and you watch the culture come alive the way a plant comes alive in sun. The bubbles multiplying, the smell sharpening into the clean, bright, wheaty sour that is the smell of good bread being born. You make a loaf. It rises the way bread is supposed to rise. It bakes the way bread is supposed to bake. The kitchen fills with the smell you missed for 4 months, without knowing you were missing it until it came back. The smell of proper bread, caramelizing in heat, its crust browning, its crumb opening into the 1,000 small chambers that make bread. You take it out of the oven. You hold it for a moment. The weight of it, the warmth on your palms. You cut a slice. The crumb is white, not grey, not dark. White, with those small irregular holes, soft and yielding under your fingers. You eat it plain, no butter, nothing else, standing at the kitchen counter, and you chew slowly, and it tastes like everything that was absent for 4 months. Tastes like the before, tastes like the city that was, tastes like ordinary days. You make sure you taste every part of it. The world will spend the next 150 years forgetting how to taste ordinary days, becoming used to them again, losing them again. It goes in cycles, the losing and the remembering, and you cannot know this standing in the kitchen in April 1871 with a slice of proper bread in your hand. But something in you has been calibrated differently now, something that measures ordinary bread against the grey bread and finds ordinary bread extraordinary. That calibration will not leave you. You take another slice, spread a little butter on it, real butter, yellow, with a clean salted Normandy in it. Put it in your mouth. Close your eyes, but that is spring. Right now it is November still, or December, or January. Whichever night you are in the deep of the siege, in the cold of the apartment on the Rue de la Huchette, in the attic above the kitchen where the straw mattress is thin, and the blanket is thin, and the cold presses in from 3 walls because there is no fire up here. There is never a fire up here. You are lying down. The city outside is making its night sounds, the distant rattle of a Garde Nationale patrol on the cobblestones. A dog. There are still some dogs left in November. They will be gone by December, barking somewhere in the next street. The wind coming off the Seine, which is 3 streets away, which you have been living next to for a year and a half and have not yet stopped hearing. The Seine smells different at night, less like city, more like river, more like the thing it has always been, underneath everything the city piles on top of it. Your hands ache. This is the thing nobody warns you about cooking in siege conditions. Your hands ache every night. From the cold, cooking with cold hands, handling cold water, kneading cold dough, and from the specific repetitive work of doing more with less, of the 100 small adjustments and improvisations that replace the easy cooking of normal times. The knuckle of your right hand, where the glove wore through in October, is chapped to bleeding. You wrapped it today in a strip of linen from an old handkerchief. It throbs faintly. Your feet are cold, still, even under the blanket, even with your stockings on. Feet take longest to warm. You have learned this specifically over these months. You can warm your hands and your core and your face, but the feet hold the cold longer, as if your body decided they could wait. They can wait. You close your eyes. The sounds of the city thin as midnight passes. This siege changes the night. In normal times, Paris is the city that stays up late, that has theatres open past midnight, that has cafes that never close, that has the specific warm noise of a city that enjoys being a city after dark. The siege has quieted that. The curfew helps, and the cold helps more, and the simple exhaustion of a city burning more calories every day than it is consuming helps most of all. By 1 in the morning, the Rue de la Huchette is almost quiet. Almost. There is still the Seine, there is still the wind, and there is the sound you have learned to hear that you could not hear before November. The sound of rats in the walls. Not many, not loud, just the occasional soft movement, the scratch of small claws on plaster, the sense of population living parallel to yours in the building structure. You know about them now. You know they are not symbolic, not an emblem of degradation. They are just animals doing what animals do, finding food, staying warm, moving through whatever space they have found, like everyone else. You think, on the edge of sleep, about the meals, the horse daub, the first time, how it tasted, how surprised you were that it tasted like something, how the smell in the kitchen was the right kind of smell, the complex layered smell of long-cooked meat, regardless of what animal it came from. The rat civet, Christmas Day. Edouard's face when he helped you skin them, the effort it took him not to look away, the decision he made to keep looking, because looking was more honest, the smell of them braising, which was better than you expected, the way Madame Moreau did not ask and ate and did not ask again, the dark bread, the soup made from potato flour and water, the nothing soup, the elephant in the window at 45 francs a kilo, which you did not buy, which you looked at for a long time. These are your meals from the siege of Paris, or some of them. The rest of Paris has its own list, the 2 million individual list that will never be written down, that exist only in the bodies of the people who ate them and then continued on. Let the sounds of the city go soft. You are warm enough. Not comfortable. You're not comfortable. The mattress is thin and the cold is present and the ache in your hands is still there. But warm enough to sleep. Fed enough to sleep. Safe enough for tonight. Tomorrow the queue at the distribution will open at 6. Tomorrow there will be the calculation again. The flour and the lentils and the horse and whatever can be made from whatever there is. Tomorrow Monsieur Moreau will come to the kitchen door and breathe in, looking for the smell of something real. Tomorrow Edouard may or may not come home on leave, thinner, more careful with his eyes. Tomorrow the Prussian guns may or may not fire from the hills, and the church bells will ring regardless, and the Seine will be there, frozen or flowing depending on the day. But that is tomorrow. Right now you are in your room above the kitchen, and the city is quiet, and your hands ache, and you are not the person you were in September. That person, the girl from Normandy, who thought butter was a given and beef was ordinary, and the worst thing that could happen in a kitchen was a sauce that broke. She is still in you somewhere, but she's quieter now, turned inward, making room for the person the siege is building. The person who knows how to cook with nothing. The person who knows what rat smells like, braising. The person who stood on the frozen Seine and looked at the city she had chosen and found it beautiful still, even while it starved. Let your hands be still, the crack in the knuckle, the throbbing that is a little less now at rest, the roughness that will not smooth for months. That is the texture of this winter written into your skin. Let them rest. Let the kitchen below you be still, the fire banked, the stock pot cool, the levain in its jar doing its patient invisible work of staying alive in the cold. Let the Rue de la Huchette be still, the cobblestones, the closed shutters, the one candle burning in the window of the building across the street, where someone is also awake, also waiting for sleep to take them. Let the Seine be still. Let the Prussian fires on the hills be still. Let them burn. They will burn until January, and then they will stop, and the army behind them will move into the city, which is a different kind of fear that you will deal with when it comes, but not tonight. Tonight, the mattress, the blanket, the cold pressing in from three sides like a fact that has been true for so long, it has stopped being something you fight. You are enough. You have been enough. Every morning since September you have found something to cook and cooked it, and the morrows have eaten it and been fed, and tomorrow you will do it again. The body knows what the body knows. The hands remember what the hands remember. Centuries from now, someone will read about the siege of Paris in a history book. They will read about the rats and the cats and the elephants and the dark bread, and they will feel the appropriate distance that history creates, that comfortable glass between you and the thing being described. They will not smell a nothing soup. They will not know the weight of a horse shoulder wrapped in newsprint against your chest in the November cold. They will not know what it is to count 6 eggs and call them an emergency reserve and move them to the back of the shelf and try not to look at them. But right now, in this moment, on this narrow mattress in the 5th arrondissement, you are not history. You are a 19-year-old girl from Normandy who knows how to cook everything there is to cook, and several things she never expected to cook, and she is going to sleep now. Paris will be here in the morning. The Seine will be there. The levain will be alive. Your hands will open and close in the dark, practicing. Let it all go quiet. The wind, the Seine, the rats in the walls moving softly through their parallel world, the distant guns, the memory of butter. Let it all go quiet. You've earned this. Every step of the queue, every morning in the cold, every calculation, every time you made something from nothing. You've earned this. Let sleep come. Let the city hold you. Let the Seine run, or freeze, if it will freeze, beneath you, 3 streets away, carrying whatever it carries toward the sea. You are in Paris. That is still true. That is still something. Close your eyes. Good night.